One of the things I didn't know was that this is the most sold book, chess book of all times. And it has many editions. This is the third edition, while there is also a fourth edition, okay? So there are many editions of this book. I guess the author that was a chess teacher, a great chess teacher, wanted to improve the understanding of chess and how to convey chess to the masses. And in fact, he was rewarded, I understood, from the selling of this book in millions of copies. Thing that I didn't know, honestly. But I heard in a podcast, so I don't know if it's correct or not, just take it for what it is. The other thing I want to tell you is that one of my friends, Cyrus Lakdawala, that wrote many chess books, is aware that if you read this book, but he didn't tell me which edition, honestly, so I don't know if he has a magical edition number 1 or number 5, I don't know. If you read it, it will change your vision and improve your chess. So that's very interesting statement coming from him, that is an international master, which probably has a grandmaster level understanding of chess, okay? Also if he didn't become grandmaster, because sometimes the fact is some people don't have the time and the money to make all the norms, and that's a fact. With that said, I want to present you a position from the book and read you what Silman says, because I find it very interesting. Okay? He says, after the opening moves c4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, g3, bishop b4, bishop g2, castle, e4, bishop takes e3, b takes e3, c6, bishop a3, rook e8, queen b3, d6, knight e2, knight a6, d3, and knight c5. There is queen c2, and he says we get the position in diagram number 24. It was from the game Sadie Silman, played in Los Angeles, 1989, Black to Move. But why did I show you this? Because this is the part where it becomes interesting to me, right? This is chapter 2, and it's called Imbalances and the Silman Thinking Technique. A little while back, I presented a book that I have here of 400 chess strategy puzzles. Many commented saying, oh, what's the rating of this book? Because the author says it can be hard also for the 2000 rated player. Honestly, I don't believe in the rating, because the rating is a kind of a measurement of the strength between players in a certain geographical area, in a certain historical period, and so on and so forth, right? Why do I say that? Because, I'm sorry, you cannot say that an amateur club player from maybe 1970, 1980, that maybe was rated 1800, is the same 1800 of today, that the same amateur club player has access to thousands of videos, grandmasters article, books that maybe in the 1980s were not so easy to get, and they didn't explain things so well as today. So what I said to most people, they said, but I need to know the rating about this. I said, no. What you need to know is how to think. And another thing I didn't like, maybe it was Lasker that said it's better to have a plan but none at all, is the fact that most of us don't know how to make a plan. And that's a fact, right? And here, see, that's why I present you this book. Because Silman writes, to define the word plan does not necessarily mean that we know how to create one in an actual game. And that's the fact. Why it's a fact? Because a plan often is made also on the pawn structure. So if you didn't study the different pawn structures, you don't know how to make a plan. Also, if I tell you make a plan, but what does it mean, no? So let's continue to read Silman, because I think he's giving you a kind of blueprint on how to think and so how to create your own plans in a chess game. As Golombek said, this calls for the ability to recognize the existing characteristics of a position. To successfully penetrate into the mysteries of a chessboard, you have to be aware of the magic word of chess, which is imbalance. An imbalance in chess denotes any difference in the two respective positions. To think that the purpose of chess is solely to checkmate the opposing king is much too simplistic. Okay, it's not the purpose, but it's the goal. The goal in a chess game is to give checkmate. The real goal of a chess game is to create an imbalance and try to build a situation in which it is favorable for you. An understanding of a statement shows that an imbalance is not necessarily an advantage. It's simply a difference. It is the player's responsibility to turn that difference into an advantage. Here is a breakdown of the different imbalances. So I don't know if you want to write them down. I don't know if you want to buy the book. By the way, this book you can buy it maybe for $7. And if, like Davala says, is the thing that made him gain 100, 218 points, or is the thing that made him understand chess deeper, it's definitely the most well spent $7 that you can have in your chess career, right? Your journey to Grandmaster and World Champion. So maybe this is also for Neiman and some other people, if I didn't read it already. Okay, so the breakdown is the following. 1. Superior minor piece, the interplay between bishops and knights. 2. Pawn structure, like I told you, a broad subject that encompasses double pawns, isolated pawn, etc. 3. Space, the annexation of territory on a chessboard. 4. Material, owning pieces of greater value than the opponent's. 5. Control of a key file or square. Files and diagonals act as pathways for your pieces, while squares act as homes. So let's read it this, because this is a really beautiful way that he wrote down. This is something really beautiful that Silman wrote. Control of a key file or square. Files and diagonals act as pathways, so the highway, for your pieces. So where your pieces want to go, right? You go through the highway. While squares act as home. Where is the square of that piece, right? So that's very important. 6. Lead in development. More force in a specific area of a board. 7. Initiative. Dictating the tempo of a game. And here he writes, recognizing these imbalances, you will find definition to all these terms in the glossary at the end of this book, and understanding their relationship to planning will be the main focus of this book. So that's once more, buy this book. Or if you cannot find, I'm sure this edition is even better than this other one, right? But I love all the editions because in any case, people were able to think also in old times. Maybe, this was written when, let's see, when it was written, 1993, copyright, yeah, 1993. So it's a good book, also if it's not printed or published in 2024, right? Okay. So if we are to use this thing properly, we must be able to break down our thinking in a way that allows us to dissect any particular position. Here are the stages of my thinking technique that enables us to accomplish this. So here it's giving us a thinking technique that will work for every position, right? It says, figure out the positive and negative imbalances for both sides. 2. Figure out the side of a board you wish to play on. You can only play where a favorable imbalance or the possibility of creating a favorable imbalance exists. 3. Don't calculate. Instead, dream up various fantasy positions. For example, the position you would most like to achieve. And this is very true for the endgame. For the endgame, you must use this idea. Dream the position that you want to achieve. Right? 4. Once you find a fantasy position that makes you happy, you must figure out if you can reach it. If you find that your choice was not possible to implement, you must create another dream position that is easier to achieve. And 5. Only now do you look at the moves you wish to calculate, called candidate moves. The candidate moves are all the moves that lead to our dream position. This will be discussed fully in part 3 of this book. And now it says, let's now take a look at this thinking technique in action. If it seems difficult, don't panic, or you can panic, and generally in US a doctor will give you a pill for your anxiety. It just takes practice. Nobody ever said that getting your thoughts to work in a structured way would be easy. And here it's present this game, right? And it says, what should black do? You had enough time to know what you should do, because I was reading 2 pages, right, of this book. He wants to avoid simple developing moves like bishop d7 or bishop e6, since they are not part of a particular plan. To say that your plan is just to develop your pieces is a cop-out. Remember, first find a plan and then develop your forces around it. Never mindlessly develop and expect to find a plan at some later point in the game. Okay, but this is very, very interesting. Because in fact, this is what they tell us most of the time. They tell us, oh, you must develop all your pieces. Yeah, but where? And then the where in reality can be answered only if you have a plan. No? So how do we find a plan here for black? Right? He says the first thing we have to do is figure out the imbalances. White has 2 bishops, but at the moment the bishop on g2 is inactive, and the black knight on c5 is very well placed. This knight is just as good as any bishop. White has double pawns, but they are not weak in this position. The c4 pawn gives white added control on d5, on the d5 square, while its Siamese twin on c3 controls the d4 square, thus preventing black from rushing a knight there by knight e6 and d4. Okay. The final imbalance of note is the lack of open files for the rooks. The only one available is the b file. The b file, right? something that white can use if he so wishes. Since material is even and nobody has an edge in space or development, that ends our breakdown of imbalances in this position. Keep in mind that we are just listing them, not judging their respective value. Next, we have to figure out which side of the board to play on. So, did you figure out which side of the board you want to play on? Remember that you should only play where a favorable imbalance or the possibility of creating one exists. This is extremely important. Let's say black loves to attack. Nothing pleases him more than mating the opponent king. Such a player would naturally look to the king side. Fourth, in just about any situation. In this case, what factor exists on the king side that favor black? The answer is none. With no white weakness, there and a few black pieces aiming in that direction, you won't mate just with a c8 bishop and the f6 knight, because obviously these are two, right? But here you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces, so you cannot overcome the opponent with just 2 pieces, right? So it says black has little to opt for on that wing. And I think now we guess that probably it must be the center or the queen side, right? So let's see what he says. Perhaps he is emotionally ready to start some sort of do or die charge, but his position is not backing him up. Black must calm down and look elsewhere. Since the king side doesn't seem to be the promised land, we will turn our attentions to the center. The center, right? The most important part of the square, of the chessboard. So here we have some hope for play, because both our knights influence this sector, right, of the board. However, since there are no ready-made squares or weaknesses to go for, we would be forced to crack it open with a central advance, right, d6, d5. Since this type of advance would give us more central territory and potential open files for our rooks, it is worth pursuing. Okay, so this is what his plan is. He wants to play d5. But in order to play d5, probably must still think a little, right? Once we find an interesting path, we go to our next step, the creation of a fantasy position. Not that we are still not calculating any variations. A fantasy position is just that, a fantasy. We place the pieces wherever we want them in order to carry out a plan. In this case, d6, d5. So he wants this to happen, but he must place the pieces in the right way, right? So this is where fantasy, imagination comes in, right? Okay, here we note that our knight on c5 would hang if we move the d-pawn too quickly. Yeah, if you move this is lost because of this, right? Okay. So we must give this piece support. And already now you think, well, maybe this is the move, right? Why do you think that? Because he spoke about open files, so this must go maybe to the center, and this must be supported, and then you will push, right? So I think this is what he's saying. Let's see if it's true or not, right? Okay? Okay. We must also be careful that the resultant opening up of a center does not activate white's bishops. These two. To this end, we would like to trade off or at least challenge white's bishop on g2. Wow, very smart. So he says that this must be exchanged with this in order to make this happen safely. And of course, you must remember how to support the knight c5. This goes along with a rule that we will study in a later lesson. If the opponent has the two bishops, trade one bishop off. This will lead to a more manageable bishop versus knight situation. And this, I think, is what Lakdawala means with reading this book and learning how to think, how to improve. That's amazing, yeah. To fulfill these ideas, we come up with the following setup. Oh wow, he shows a diagram here in the book that you can see with the dreaming setup. So he wants b6 to support the knight on c5, the bishop b7 to challenge the one on g2, the rook on c8. It's probably an attack, a serry attack on the queen on c2. Very interesting. So this is the dream position that he's thinking about. Notice nothing has changed in white, but in black position a lot. And he says, notice what was done. So this, and this. Okay. Notice what was done. Black just placed his pieces and pawns in the desired positions. He didn't move them there. He then decides if achieving this leads anywhere. A glance at the diagram shows that black would have a good play. However, it must be admitted that the construction of this setup would take several moves. What would white be doing in the meantime? So, as you can see, it's also important that you ask yourself, what is your opponent doing, right? Because most of the people, they just care about themselves, and they never ask what their opponent are doing. I'm guilty too, especially in blitz games. And then you discover that your opponent had a plan too, and this plan was kind of preventable. It was you could prophylaxis and stop it, but you didn't do it, and since you didn't do it, is winning. And that's the terrible part. Yeah. Okay, so what would white be doing in the meantime? To answer this, you would go through the same stages for your opponent. So, as you can see, I believe this kind of thinking technique that is giving us, maybe it's the best practice in a correspondence game. Also today on chess.com and I think richest, you can play games at 1 day, 3 days, 7 days, and so you have time to put the position on the board and decide what to move. Okay? Okay, so as it turned out, white's correct plan is to play for king side expansion by an f2, f4 advance. Notice this can be done very quickly by castling and then f2, f4. So what we end up with is an interesting plan of central expansion for black that would hopefully counteract white's theme of kingside pawn storm. The one problem is timing. White's plan is faster than ours. If we decided that we wanted to play this way, we would then look for a candidate's move, example, all the moves that aid us in setting up the desired position. In this case, only one move comes into consideration, which is b6, obviously. So, like I told you guys before, is dreaming the position, and he says, I need force to support this, and what do you do it with b6? Honestly, I thought queen e7 would work, but yeah, obviously I'm not as good as Mr. Silman, and so that's it. We would then analyze it, and if everything checks out, we would store it away as a playable idea. We still don't want to play it, because we have yet to explore the possibility of a queenside plan. So look also how thorough is Mr. Silman. He's not just saying, oh, let's do this for a second. No, he says, hey, we did this, but now we also need to understand if there is a queenside plan or not. And that's obviously the strength of the title player. As you can see, he thinks methodically. He rejected this side. He said, this seems a good possibility. Now, however, let's see also this possibility. So it doesn't stop at the fourth plan. He sees if there is another one, okay? Are there any weaknesses to attack? No. However, our strong c5 knight is placed there, and white's double pawns, which at the moment are by-no means weak, are also on that side. Since we have no clear targets to attack, can we create one? Can we open lines there? Yes, he says, yes. With b7, b5. We can force an immediate crisis. After b5, there is obviously c takes b5, c takes b5, and black would have made a gain in queenside territory, and also created a weakness in white's camp, a backward pawn on c3. To make matters even better, this pawn lies on a newly open file. Now the file is open for black, right? Our plan would then be obvious. Move our bishop, place a rook on c8, and put pressure on white, weak and accessible pawn on c3. So it turns out that we have a choice, play in the center or on the queen side. In the game, black choose the queen side simply because it is the faster plan. Okay, this is the very interesting part, and while I was reading it, I thought, okay, but who cares? Why then white shouldn't change this? Because, yes, the bishop pair is very, very strong, especially in the end, or I don't know what computers have, because maybe they don't have hands, of an engine. But the thing is, who cares? Remove that, because in this moment, this knight is stronger than this bishop, for example, right? And here we see one thing. Silman was reading my mind. He says, not that black is not worried about white playing bishop takes c5, since after d takes c5, black could make use of a newly opened d file to attack the backward pawn on d3. Okay, so let's see again what happened, right? Because I think we were in this position, if I'm correct, I hope. Let me check, but it doesn't matter here. So I said 11 b5 is the move. C takes b5, c takes b5, after which white played castle and bishop b7. A tough choice. Black wants to put his rook on c8 as quickly as possible, but is not sure where to place his bishop. A good alternative is, of course, this and this. Now, again, I don't want to give you all the book, but I think, guys, that this book is really, really great. And I think at this point we are like half an hour into a video, so maybe it would make sense to break it in part 2, because I don't think anybody really has more than half an hour a day on chess, at least not especially adults with a job, family, and all the rest that comes with it. So I will stop here in this position, which is one with bishop b7, and make a second video, because I think Silman is really interesting, and it's a beautiful book to read. Again, you don't have to spend money in a new edition, because Silman wisdom clearly flows out from this book, and I think I bought it for like $7 or less, or even less, I don't know. Thank you very much for watching.